You're listening to CIA, Coffee, Intel, and Anxiety, a podcast from retired CIA officers Jeff and Pete. Drawing from decades in the intelligence world, they offer real stories, sharp analysis, and honest reflections on the pressure, decisions, and daily chaos that come with a life of secrets. Add coffee, a dry sense of humor, and a friendship forged under fire, and you've got a podcast like no other.
Morning, Pete. How you doing today?
Hey, good morning, Jeff. How are you?
Living the dream, living the dream.
I see you have a guest. You have a guest sitting next to you.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. This is my good friend. I tell people that she's arguably my best friend in the state of Florida. She is a true patriot. She spent, 4 years in the Army?
8 years in the reserves trying to pay for college.
Yeah. So she served in the military, machine gun for.
I was a machine gunner in a postal unit, and only because I didn't trust anybody in the postal unit, so I wanted the M60. I'm 5'5" when I stand up straight, and my assistant gunner was like 6'3". So we were cute. I thought we were cute.
So she served she served the country in the military, and then came back and did 23 years in Tampa Police Department. She is recently retired lieutenant, so she's nobody's slouch when it comes to law enforcement, and we're lucky to have her. As I said, she's a very close friend of mine, and we are going to talk today about what happens when you have a attack, a shooting, some kind of attack on your facility, on your business, and how can you protect yourself. So we're going to talk today about some background on that so we can have everybody on the same sheet of music so we know what we're talking about, because lots of times things get messy in the definitions. If you go to the FBI, they have one definition of a mass shooting. You go to an anti-gun organization, they have a different definition of a mass shooting. So we're going to go ahead and try and lay a common framework for the discussion. And then we'll get Peco's expertise to review some of the incidents that have happened. And then after that, we will hopefully have a discussion on solutions and what you can do to protect yourself.
Sounds excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for your service. Really appreciate it. It's a long service, not just, 1 or 2 years. I mean, a whole career.
Yes, and you know what? I needed it. The Army probably kept me out of prison. I had a lot of energy and no constructive way to use it until I joined the Army. So I owe the Army for sure.
That's awesome. I'm sure. I mean, since Jeff knows you for so long, probably Jeff has a lot of interesting stories. But we'll leave that for another. We'll leave that for another time.
Is the statute of limitations over yet? I don't know if I can talk about my crazy stories yet.
You can confide them to us, and we'll decide.
We'll decide on a public podcast.
Right.
Right.
So let's start with some review of some of the more notable incidences so people understand what are we talking about. So Peco, what is your definition and what have you seen in your career in law enforcement about these attacks on businesses and facilities?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind as far as a definition, I know that there are official definitions based on number of people shot or number of people dead, all that kind of stuff. As a responding police officer, and as I was a lieutenant when I retired, as a person responsible for creating safety plans for public events and stuff like that, the definition of a mass shooting is where somebody comes up with a gun and decides to start shooting at strangers. That's it. Whether you're hit or not, because there's a trauma that happens when you hear past your ear and you hear shooting. As a matter of fact, there was an incident at the outlet mall that people thought was a shooting, and everybody ran, and people were actually injured in the running, and it wasn't. It was a big stack of metal chairs that had fallen over. It sounded like shots. So your brain and your body, when it sounds like gunshots, that's what your brain thinks it is, and your brain responds based on that. whether you're hit or not. So to me, that's the thing we need to prevent. Whether anybody's shot or not, we need to prevent those mostly preventable moments where strangers decide that they need to shoot other people because of how they feel.
So then let's talk about some specific examples.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot of examples. I think the American public is very knowledgeable about mass shootings, whether it's school shootings or workplace violence, or just, parade shootings at parades, public shootings, public attacks, mass attacks. I actually like to refer to them as mass attacks. There's, been as recent as in South Carolina, a dean of a university was shot by a security guard. The guy who's you're supposed to be relying on safety, he's the guy that shot her and killed her. In my city where I worked, we had calls where businesses, the good businesses who had been trained, they would call the police before they fired the person, making a safe exit. I'm a big fan and I'm a big proponent, and that's when I consult with businesses, I definitely try to get them to understand the concept of a safe termination. And a safe termination involves looking at the behavior, and if the behavior has had violent threats and all kinds of stuff, and it seems like it could escalate, you maintain the dignity of the person. You got to maintain the dignity of the person and have the police on standby. I've been in a lobby nearby where the person walked right past me going to the office, and when they saw me, mumbled a cuss word under their breath, and watched on closed circuit TV so that we weren't right on top of them. But everything went, he was really mad, started throwing out F-bombs, but he left. Nobody got hurt. He never came back. So there's there's a way for organizations to respond to signs of distress and instability in their workers, because aren't offices and organizations, aren't they just little societies? And what happens in society happens at work, right? And sometimes we get our relationships with each other, we get, we're a family. Well, aren't there dysfunctional families? So there's a lot. If we look at case studies of different shootings, a lot of times we'll hear people say, well, you know what? He used to talk about, he was going through a divorce and he talked about how much he hated women. Well, 72% of all victims of workplace violence, do you think they have ovaries, or do you think they don't? They do. Mm-hmm. Women, right? Just like in society, most people who are the subject of violence attacks are women, right? So there's personal relationships involved in workplace violence, but there's also criminal intent, robberies. The number one workplace assault is through robberies. That makes sense.
What do you mean?
If you're a convenience store worker getting robbed, if you handle cash and you're leaving your store getting robbed, the number one report, the profession that has the most assaults, it's not police officers, it's healthcare.
I can attest to that
from
my time at the Trinity Hospital.
Right.
And the healthcare system we have is actually one of the best in the world, no matter what other people might say. But it is a stressful situation. There is no way you can slice and dice a trip to the emergency room that is not stressful.
Right.
Whether you are the patient, the parent, the daughter, it's a high stress situation. And so healthcare workers are 50%, I think.
75%
of all, that's right,
all reports of workplace violence. Yeah.
So that's why at the hospital we were very, very attentive to that. And I can throw out just an example of the kind of stress that the patients are under. There was a lady who had a miscarriage, and so she was up in the pregnancy ward. What do you call it, where you have babies?
The L&D, labor and delivery.
Labor and delivery, thank you. She was in the labor and delivery ward, and she had a miscarriage, but it was on Mother's Day weekend. And
Horrible.
so
Oh my God.
he was hearing people like me say to the nurses, what have you, Happy Mother's Day, just as a friendly greeting, made her livid beyond words.
Yeah.
And I can understand she's under a lot of emotional distress.
Well, anger is part of grief.
Yeah, absolutely. And so all of that was coming out, and we had to, as politely as we could, help her get out of the building. We didn't get on the elevator with her, but we made sure she got on the elevator and someone was down at the on the ground floor by the elevator to try and make sure they got walked out okay.
Did the hospital, the social worker, did they have like a follow-up plan for that?
Nah, the hospitals don't do much of that. That's a separate
Yeah.
system. So any trip to the hospital is going to be stressful.
Yeah.
And we do the best we can. We have great health care, but nurses, as you correctly stated, get assaulted. When you have drunk people come in, which we got all the time, drug overdoses, we got all the time in the emergency
Yeah,
room.
people come out of when you use Narcan, my experience with Narcan is we'd say ready, get ready, because as soon as they came back, they'd be throwing punches.
I was assaulted when on my job at the hospital. Some guy
Oh, that's right.
came running around the corner. He was using the phone in the behavioral health section, and I was just watching him on the camera from around the corner where he couldn't see me. He slammed the phone down and came charging out like he was going to run out. So I stepped in front of him. That's kind of my job. He ran right into me, knocked me backwards. The good news is I hit a bed, bounced back up, and ran him down. And I got him when he got to the doors, which don't open from the inside. So he could not exit. And we got him down. You know, one of my officers showed up a minute or two later with his taser ready to go. So yeah, these things happen, and that case is still going through the courts.
Oh yeah, it'll be there for a while, especially if he was in the behavioral health unit.
Well, and he's got a history, and
Right.
you know, they've asked me, do you care if we do this kind of program with him? I don't care. You know, you guys are the state's attorney. You do what you think is best. So at any rate, yes, health workers get assaulted. Teachers get assaulted. Stuff happens at schools. So this is happening on a wide basis. And I think we go back to what you were talking about with the behavior cues. Now I have one question on behavior cues. What about the Las Vegas shooting, where you actually had hotel workers help this guy get all these flipping guns up to his room?
Right.
And how would what you're talking about, planning, preparation, observation, how would that have worked?
So the Las Vegas shooter, and I don't like to mention people by name because once you engage in that, I don't want to say your name anymore.
That's
I
fine.
don't want to remember the
No, I
person.
don't. We don't need names. We know what we're talking about.
Right. So the way that he lived a life where he was kind of he really wasn't in an office, so he wasn't observed by people on a daily basis. He kind of his behavior cues would have been much harder to find. However, he was known to have certain beliefs, but nothing, you know, there's just because somebody thinks, you know, they can't trust the government doesn't mean they're going to go do. Matter of fact, there are way more people who say things that they may be against something who never do anything violent. So we can't cry wolf every single time. His planning for the Las Vegas shooting was really spot on. If you know, I don't think there was a lot of emotion to it. Most like school shootings, there's a lot of emotion around it, and there's a lot of behavior cues, mostly in younger people than there are in older people. More personal relationships, there's behavior cues. His was a lot harder to, would have been a lot harder to predict. The way, hindsight's 2020, the way around that in the hotel, for as long as the hotel had been around, you know, it's really not their job to look in your suitcase if they don't have an indication that, you know, and there are physical indications if you're carrying, if you actually have a concealed firearm. A lot of people do it's called a security feel to make sure that it's still there. It just is the way our psychology works. If you're carrying illegally, people tend to do a security feel a lot more because they're nervous about being found out. There's other things too that indicate whether somebody's got a firearm on them. I don't believe he was carrying concealed. Everything was in the trunks that he had. So his demeanor totally relaxed. But looking back, if I was hotel security now, it would just be general protocol. You have larger boxes. Everything's going through an X-ray, and it's not anything I need to tell anybody about. It's just all going through an X-ray, just like at the post office. Every big package goes through an X-ray. And it's, they have smaller X-rays now. They don't look, not everything is ginormous where you have to walk through, but they could actually make their doors walking X-rays. I mean, there's so many.
Not just for boxes, but I mean, almost any of the suitcases that are carried into the hotel or the casino. I think a lot of it, though, comes to this mentality. We want to make the experience as pleasant as possible. People don't want to go in to the hotel thinking, oh, I'm being like checked for because of security of
Right.
bad, right?
But
what's that trade-off, right?
It could be a TSA because they already have a room of cameras. They already have the infrastructure for it. If they had the same, the X-ray machine at the airport actually uses color signals based on the density of something that's carried. So it's not only shape, it's color and density. And the way that the TSA people are that monitor that, they're trained to know what they're looking at. Well, the same thing could happen in hotels, especially hotels that have where there are a lot of targets. There's a lot of opportunities to do bad things.
Yeah. So I know that Pete and I have traveled enough, and we've been to enough hotels where my suitcases have gone. When I'm checking into a hotel, it goes through an X-ray. If you go, Israel may not be a great example because of the high threat nature that's been going on there. But for you to go into that hotel, they're going to look through everything you got, whether you like it or not. And that's just a safety protocol. And, from my own experience working security, I'm sure Pete's the same way, especially you. Security is an inconvenience. It's a real bummer.
Well, and there's also what we have that no other country in the world has is the right to carry. And that actually, this country, our forefathers made it where it was not supposed to be easy to police. It's supposed to be easy for you as an individual to live a happy life, right?
God bless America.
Your pursuit of happiness. It's not supposed to be easy for the police to interfere with your pursuit of happiness. So and depending on the state, like Florida just became a concealed carry state where you don't even need a permit. I'm not happy about that as a police officer because it makes it much harder for us to stop people with bad intent. Whereas before I could see behavior cues that somebody was carrying, depending on how they were carrying and depending on the environment. If I had a reasonable suspicion to believe somebody was illegally carrying and I had more observations, I'm looking for this now, then I developed the probable cause to believe they're illegally carrying. Now I can stop them, take the gun away, stop the robbery. Now I can't.
So what about as an example of the Orlando shooting that happened at, was it the Pulse nightclub, I think?
That was that guy had all kind of behavior cues because he hated gays. That was specifically anti-LGBT, specifically, and it was based on his religious beliefs. And he just happened to be a Muslim, but there's plenty of people who say they're Christian who have similar beliefs. So it doesn't matter the religion. Let's not blame religion. It's the way the person acts on it. And that guy had online statements. He had told his family members, he had told people in his mosque, he had told everybody, right? But there had never been, at the time he did that shooting, it was the largest mass shooting in the United States history.
Up until the Vegas shooting, right?
Up until the Vegas shooting, exactly right. So, and like the bar, there's, I'm gay, and I know that in gay bars, it is always a concern. Nobody lives like hypervigilant or anything, but it never goes away for any gay person in America that a group of people who hate gays is going to come and beat the crap out of us. It never goes away. It just is what it is. So I'm not going to blame the bar. There's really nothing the bar could have done. The the path to violence could have been disrupted by the people who knew him if they had believed him. People say what they're going to do, believe them.
But I believe I've heard that he actually scoped out at least one other location to do something like this, and I think it was by Disney or Disney Springs or something, and decided against it because he noted one of the things that it appears that he was concerned about was the security there.
Right.
Versus at the club, I read that I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but based on what I read, they had no security.
They did have
And
security. They had off-duty police, off-duty Orlando police,
okay.
And they had security guards on the inside, but it was just, regular security. It wasn't event style. And now Disney's got money, and Disney, let me tell you something. I'll never do anything wrong in Disney property because it's private property, and their security people, their private security, and our laws allow for them to detain you for the police, and they don't mess around. So, anything on Disney property around Disney Springs, that's going to be the best security that you could get. Everybody else who can afford that. So the club did everything. They had off-duty officers there. Who, a matter of fact, the off-duty officer, one of the off-duty officers working there was fired back, and he did everything he possibly could. Like, I can't fault anybody in, with, and this is the nature of safety work anyway. We anticipate what could possibly go wrong. We put things in place to the best of our knowledge and ability, and then when something goes wrong, either we had enough or we didn't, and we had to improvise.
So, Pete, you talked earlier about a BP facility that was attacked. Do you want to talk on that a little bit?
Okay, actually, it was a gas plant in Algeria. It's called the In Amenas location of this gas plant, and it was a partnership between BP, Statoil, and I think maybe an Algerian small interest in that partnership. And it was I think it was probably the biggest attack on a major international property, especially the biggest attack in regard to the oil industry internationally that ever took place. And this is in 2013, and it was actually undertaken by a local Al Qaeda group that had conducted for a period of time, their collection. They collected intel on this location for some time. It appears that they also infiltrated the organization with some people that were loyal to them. Nevertheless, they took over the plant, and it was for a number of days when they held the plant and they held people hostage. And ultimately, the Algerian military went in there. They had some kind of agreement that the Algerian military would provide security outside of the perimeter, of the plant itself. And so eventually they came in, and it got very bloody, and approximately 39 foreign workers were killed, and one Algerian was killed. And of those, there were people from the UK, Norway, United States, France, and Japan. A lot of them who were killed were ones that had explosives strapped to their bodies. And so when the Algerians tried to come in, they just blew these people up. And so they've done a lot of studies afterward as who was to blame. They never thought this magnitude of an attack would take place, right? They never imagined that the government that they were counting on for this security from externally would come in with that sort of force, as a response. And it was just brutal. It was just brutal. And there's just so many things that weren't done right, things that weren't prepared for, planning that maybe these drill, you have these plans, crisis plans, and you have these drills, and the drills weren't really, followed through. The alarms weren't necessarily even functional. I mean, there was a lot of things that made this a perfect storm.
Right.
That's the "it can't happen here" syndrome. And we all know what happens when you take that approach. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come back on our next session, and we're going to talk about how you can overcome the "it can't happen here" syndrome, and what kind of policies and procedures we as individuals can put in place to protect our businesses and our families from this kind of shooting. And we'll get into some specifics on the specific kind of training and other things that you can do as an individual to protect your business, to protect yourself, and to protect your fellow American. Any other final words, Big Pete?
No, I have kind of a funny incident, and this is after 9/11 when everything was just like really, increasing security worldwide. I went, we travel a lot overseas, and I travel with my son to Bolivia, and we travel around, and I just remember in one particular city called Cochabamba, I think it was Cochabamba, where they have some mines there, and we were going through, and the guy was taking us around and said, "Hey, you wanna, we look into the hardware store," and he said, "You want to buy some explosives, and we can throw, you and your son can throw these sticks of dynamite into the reservoir." And I said, "Really? We can just go in there and buy dynamite? Sure, it's fun." So we bought dynamite. We were out there, we got video of ourselves throwing the sticks of dynamite into the reservoir, and it was a lot of fun. The next day, we're going to the airport to take a plane to another city, and this is Lloyd Airlines, which is a major airline in Bolivia. And I just remember checking in at this particular time. Now this is a few years ago now, and there was no security to even look in our luggage or anything, whether we checked it in or carried what we carried on board. Absolutely no check. So I'm thinking, I could have brought some of those dynamite as souvenirs, and nobody wouldn't even have known. I mean, to me, it was just
There are
amazing.
dynamite as souvenirs in the United States. I was a bomb tech with the police department, and we got called for more. Grandpa passed away, and he's got a whole bunch of grenades in the attic. We got plenty of calls for that because they were
Oh my gosh.
bringing it over from their time in the military or whatever. Yeah.
Well, there's no question in my mind that you two both have explosive personalities.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to the next episode on this
All
continuation.
right. Thank you very much, Pete.
Thank you.
Peco, thank you very much. Everybody have a great day and stay safe.